Most companies don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because they were never built to last. So why do a few companies survive for decades, sometimes centuries, while others disappear overnight? And here's the shocking part. The companies that changed the world weren't always the smartest, richest, or first to the market. In Built to Last, Jim Collins uncovers the hidden principles behind legendary companies that outlived trends, crises, and competition. This isn't just a business audiobook. It's a blueprint for building something that survives time itself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Book Podcast Zone.
I'm Emma.
And I'm John.
So we have a really massive, just incredibly complex terrain to cover today. We are doing a deep dive into the source material, specifically unpacking this highly detailed framework called Architecting the Eternal.
Right. A blueprint for visionary legacy.
Exactly. And, I want you, the listener, to actively interrogate what we're discussing today. Don't just sit back and absorb this passively.
Yeah, you have to apply it.
Right.
Whether you are, say, scaling a mid-sized logistics firm or trying to change the culture inside a huge corporate bureaucracy, or even literally just mapping out how your personal values will outlive you, we're going to look at the actual nuts and bolts of legacy.
We really are. What we're doing today is basically dissecting the DNA of endurance. We're going to completely bypass those superficial business tropes you hear on every social media feed.
Oh, definitely.
Instead, we're looking at the specific mechanical reasons why certain entities inevitably just fade away, while others manage to thrive across multiple generations.
And to make sure this doesn't stay trapped in, the realm of academic theory, we are anchoring this deep dive entirely in real-world, local, U.S.-based example.
Right. We want to show you the internal machinery of the American economic landscape.
So, let's establish the fundamental premise here. The big overarching question of this whole framework is the difference between simple survival and actually thriving enough to leave an indelible mark.
Because if you look at the U.S. markets, the churn rate is just staggering.
It's insane.
I mean, the average lifespan of a company on the S&P 500 has plummeted from nearly 60 years back in the 1950s to under 20 years today.
Wow. Under 20.
Yeah. Companies are coming and going faster than ever before.
Which really makes the anomaly so fascinating, right?
Totally. Let's look at the Ames Company. It's a historic U.S. brand based in Massachusetts. They started forging shovels in 1774.
Wait, 1774, before the country was technically a country.
Exactly. Think about that timeline. They provided the shovels that literally dug the Erie Canal.
That's crazy.
Their tools were used to lay the tracks for the Transcontinental Railroad. They pivoted their manufacturing to support the Union Army during the Civil War. And they're still manufacturing tools today.
That isn't just surviving a market cycle. That is centuries of institutional staying power.
Right. Now, contrast that deep generational infrastructure with the flash-in-the-pan Silicon Valley model. You see these companies...
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah, I won't name the modern ones, but think historically of the pets.com era in the late 90s.
Right, the dot-com bubble.
They raise hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
They purchase a massive Super Bowl ad footprint. They burn incredibly bright for 18 months.
Yeah.
And then they completely vaporize.
It's basically the business equivalent of a massive supernova versus a main sequence star.
That's a great way to put it.
But, here is what I want to challenge you on regarding this dynamic.
Right.
We are culturally obsessed with the supernova.
Oh, completely.
I think of it as a pop star analogy. We love the one-hit wonder who dominates the radio for a summer. We celebrate the overnight unicorn, the founder on the magazine cover, the explosive IPO.
The initial spark.
Exactly. We rarely celebrate the metallurgical consistency of a 250-year-old shovel manufacturer. Why is our collective focus entirely on that initial spark rather than the slow burn of longevity?
Well, I mean, it comes down to human psychology.
Right.
And the way we process narrative.
How so?
The spark is highly visible. It's highly dramatic, and it requires very little context to understand. A massive influx of capital or a viral user acquisition metric is a spectacular, easily digestible event.
Right, it makes for a great headline.
Exactly. But foundational legacy building, the kind that creates an Ames company, is inherently quiet. It is the unglamorous daily compounding of systemic discipline.
So it's boring, essentially.
Well, to the media, yeah.
Yeah.
The difference is mechanistic. Fleeting market capture relies on a temporary alignment of luck, timing, and a specific market condition. If the condition changes, the entity dies.
Because they don't have a foundation.
Right. Legacy building is actively engineered to withstand the inevitable moments when luck and timing turn aggressively against you. You build an organization that can survive the death of its founder or the obsolescence of his product.
It's the difference between catching lightning in a bottle and doing the grueling work of building the actual power plant.
That is exactly it.
So if you want to understand how to build that power plant, we have to look past the flashy headlines. And if you are finding these underlying mechanisms as fascinating as we are, please like, subscribe, and share for more updates.
Because understanding this shifts us directly into dismantling the most pervasive falsehoods about success.
That's the perfect pivot. To build something lasting, we really have to aggressively deconstruct the myths we've been taught.
Yeah, Chapter 2 in the source material emphasizes that our entire cultural understanding of how visionary companies start is fundamentally flawed. We have to free ourselves from the trap of the great idea.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is practically American corporate religion.
It really is.
We are constantly sold this romanticized U.S. narrative of the lone, eccentric genius in a California garage.
The Steve Jobs archetype.
Right. The myth goes that they are struck by a singular moment of divine inspiration, they sketch a brilliant product on a napkin, and boom, a visionary company is born. We are told that without that world-changing idea, you shouldn't even bother starting.
And, empirically, when you actually study the genesis of enduring institutions, that narrative is almost entirely false.
Really? Entirely false.
Pretty much. It's survivorship bias layered with marketing. Let's look at the actual mechanics of how Hewlett-Packard started.
Okay, let's hear it.
Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard did in fact start in a Palo Alto garage. That geographic detail is true, but the intellectual genesis, that's a myth.
Wait, they didn't have the printer or the computer idea ready to go?
Not at all. They didn't have a specific revolutionary product in mind. They simply knew they possessed a shared set of values and wanted to build an organization together.
So what were they doing in the garage then?
They were basically highly educated tinkerers taking on odd jobs. They built a foul line indicator for bowling alleys.
You're kidding! A bowling alley sensor?
Yeah, they built a specialized shock machine to help people lose weight. Most of these early ideas were complete failures.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you there and push back.
Go for it.
Because if I am listening to this right now and I want to build a legacy, it feels wildly counterintuitive, maybe even irresponsible, to suggest that I should just start an organization without a clear product thesis.
I get why it feels that way.
Right, because Wall Street won't fund a team of tinkerers with no product. How can you build something to last if you literally do not know what you are selling at first?
But it feels counterintuitive because we confuse the vehicle with the destination. The authors of the source text identify this as the ultimate trap.
The trap being the product itself.
Exactly. If your entire organizational identity is predicated on a single brilliant product, you are incredibly fragile.
Because markets change.
Right. What happens when the underlying technology shifts and your brilliant product becomes obsolete? You die with the product.
Oh, wow.
The profound architectural shift here is realizing that the company itself is the ultimate creation. The products are just temporary, disposable vehicles.
The organization itself is the product. I love that.
It's powerful, right? Let's look at Motorola. When Paul Galvin started it in the late 1920s, it wasn't a telecommunications giant.
What were they doing?
He was running a failing business that built battery eliminators.
What is a battery eliminator?
It was a device that allowed battery-powered radios to run on household electricity.
Okay, very niche.
Extremely.
Mm-hmm.
And when that market evaporated, he didn't fold the company because his creation wasn't the battery eliminator. His creation was a highly adaptable, gritty organization of engineers.
I see.
He pivoted them to car radios, then to defense electronics, then to microprocessors, and eventually to cellular phones.
So the overarching mechanism here is that visionary founders don't obsess over a single great idea. They obsess over designing an organization that can sequentially generate thousands of great ideas over a century.
Exactly. It completely reorganizes the hierarchy of entrepreneurship.
It really does. It means you shouldn't be asking, what is my great idea? You should be asking, what kind of resilient system am I building?
That's the golden question.
And for those of you eager to build those systems, like, subscribe, and share for more update. Because moving away from the great idea myth forces us to look at the core identity of the person leading the charge.
Right, which brings us to Chapter 3, and a foundational mindset shift. The difference between being a time teller and a clock builder.
I feel like this concept is the philosophical bedrock of the entire source material.
It really is. So let's define the terms for everyone. A time teller is a highly charismatic leader or a brilliant visionary who possesses the exact answer for the current moment.
Like the hero who swoops in to save the day.
Exactly. When the organization is lost, they look to this person, and this person tells them what time it is. They solve the crisis.
But a clock builder is different.
Very different. A clock builder is a leader who designs an institution, a set of cultural norms and operational systems that can tell the time long after that leader is dead.
And the most profound U.S. example of clock building isn't even corporate, is it? It's governmental.
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. Constitution.
Right. If you look at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, the Founding Fathers engaged in the ultimate clock building exercise. Let's look at the context. George Washington had immense, almost mythological popularity.
He was the indispensable man.
Exactly. They could have easily instituted a time-telling system where he ruled as a monarch or a president for life. But instead of leveraging his charisma for immediate, efficient control, they spent months locked in a sweltering room designing a notoriously inefficient, friction-heavy mechanism.
Checks, balances, independent judiciaries.
Yes. Legislative bicameralism. Why did they build a system with so much inherent friction?
Because friction prevents a single point of failure. They were designing an architecture specifically meant to outlive Washington.
To function regardless of the incompetence or malice of whoever specifically occupied the executive office decades later, they built a clock.
That's a phenomenal example. And if you translate that exact mechanism to the American business landscape, you see it perfectly embodied by Sam Walton and the rise of Walmart.
I think people profoundly misunderstand Sam Walton.
Oh, they do. The popular mythology is just an old guy in a pickup truck with a bird dog visiting rural stores and greeting customers.
It's a very folksy, charismatic image.
But that image, while authentic to his personality, completely obscures his actual genius as an architect. Walton was intensely paranoid about being a time teller.
He knew he couldn't be everywhere at once.
Exactly. He knew that his personal energy couldn't scale to thousands of stores. So in the 1980s, long before his competitors understood the power of data, Walton authorized an investment of tens of millions of dollars to build the largest private satellite communication network in America.
Wait, Walmart had their own satellite network?
Yes. He wasn't just building big box stores, he was building an intricate nervous system. This satellite network allowed Bentonville headquarters to track inventory, sales data, and supply chain logistics in real time across every single register in the country.
So he could stow away, and the machine kept running.
He built the underlying mechanics, the clock, so that the retail giant possessed a systemic intelligence that completely transcended his physical presence.
It's the difference between giving someone a fish, teaching them to fish, and building an entire self-sustaining fishery.
I love that analogy. It perfectly captures the scale of clock building.
But, this highlights a massive vulnerability for you, the listener. It requires a brutal ego check.
Oh yeah. Ego is the enemy of the clock builder.
Because being a time teller feels amazing. It strokes the ego to be the absolute smartest person in the room, the indispensable linchpin who solves every crisis.
Everyone wants to be the hero.
But if your team physically cannot function the moment you go on vacation, you haven't built a legacy. You've just built a prison of your own indispensability.
That is such a crucial realization.
You have to ask yourself, are you feeding your ego by answering every question, or are you doing the tedious work of building protocols, training manuals, and cultural standards so your team never has to ask you in the first place? It's a fundamental shift in how you measure your own value.
And it requires immense humility.
It really does. And to help us keep bringing you these deep operational insights, like, subscribe, and share for more update. Because once you start building that clock, a glaring question emerges. What is actually powering the mechanism?
Right, what is the fuel? Which brings us to Chapter 4, and one of the most misunderstood paradoxes in modern economics.
I'm really looking forward to this one.
So, the source text makes a definitive claim. For highly visionary, enduring organizations, maximizing shareholder wealth or generating profit is not the primary goal.
Wait, not the primary goal?
No. Profit is the necessary result of a deeper, driving purpose, but it is not the purpose itself.
Okay, I have to interject here and play devil's advocate.
I figured you would.
Because anyone who has spent 10 minutes in the American corporate ecosystem knows that Wall Street demands quarterly earnings. Activist investors will gut a board of directors if the margins slip by a fraction of a percent.
That's the reality of the market.
Right. So how does an organization survive the brutal, hyper-capitalist reality of the U.S. stock market if its executives actively claim that making money isn't their primary objective. It sounds like academic naivete.
I completely understand the skepticism. It sounds like corporate PR until you examine the historical actions taken during moments of extreme crisis.
Okay, give me an example.
The quintessential U.S. example of this is Johnson & Johnson and the drafting of their famous credo.
The credo.
Right. Robert Wood Johnson Jr. wrote this document in 1943, right before the company went public. He wanted to codify the clock before the pressure of public markets could corrupt it.
Smart move.
Now, the structural hierarchy of this credo is what matters. It is a legally binding ethical framework. It explicitly states that the company's first responsibility is to the American patients, doctors, and nurses who use their products.
Okay.
Their second responsibility is to their employees. Their third is to the communities and the environment they operate in. And their fourth and final responsibility is to their stockholders.
Wow. They intentionally put the people who own the company at the bottom of the list.
Yes, formally and explicitly. And the ultimate stress test of this mechanism occurred during the 1982 Tylenol crisis.
Oh, that was a huge deal.
It was terrifying. Unknown individuals in Chicago were lacing Tylenol capsules with cyanide. People died. It was an unprecedented corporate nightmare.
And what did Wall Street say they should do?
The standard, profit-driven, time-telling response advised by the FBI and Wall Street analysts at the time was to contain the damage, only recall the product in Chicago, protect the stock price, and ride it out.
Keep the profit safe.
Exactly. But James Burke, the CEO at the time, pointed directly to the credo. Because their first responsibility was to the patients, he unilaterally ordered a massive national recall of 31 million bottles of Tylenol at an immediate financial loss of over $100 million.
Which, in 1982, was an astronomical hit to the balance sheet.
It was devastating. Wall Street analysts declared the Tylenol brand dead. They thought Burke was a fool.
But they survived it.
They more than survived it. Here is the paradox of profitability. By rigorously adhering to that core purpose at massive short-term financial detriment, Burke engineered an untouchable level of consumer trust.
Right, because people saw they actually cared.
Exactly. When they reintroduced Tylenol in tamper-proof packaging a few months later, the market share didn't just recover, it exploded. Visionary companies make more money over a 50-year timeline, exactly because they're driven by something deeper than money.
That is fascinating.
If quarterly profit is your only goal, you will inevitably compromise product quality, betray your workforce, and erode brand equity to meet a short-term target. But if your goal is a higher purpose, profit naturally follows as a byproduct of the immense, irreplaceable value you are providing to society.
You know, I look at it through the mechanism of biology.
How so?
Profit is the oxygen of a business. You absolutely need it to survive. If you don't have oxygen, you die quickly. But you don't live your life just to breathe.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it.
Breathing is the mechanism that allows you to fulfill your actual purpose. If an organization forgets that, it hollows itself out from the inside.
Exactly. Profit is just the fuel for the journey.
And if you want to ensure you are building a purpose-driven structure, like, subscribe, and share for more update, because knowing your purpose leads us directly to Chapter 5, identifying the absolute unchangeable anchor of your organization.
Right. The source text refers to this as preserving the core.
Which sounds simple, but I imagine it's incredibly difficult.
Oh, it is. Because in a macroeconomic environment defined by relentless, accelerating change, technological disruption, and shifting consumer habits, what are the specific ideological tenets that must remain entirely non-negotiable?
You have to find your bedrock.
Exactly. You have to identify the bedrock that cannot be compromised under any circumstance.
And when we analyze non-negotiable core ideology, we really have to look at the structural history of Walt Disney.
The perfect example.
And I'm not just talking about the superficial brand, I'm talking about the organizational discipline. Walt Disney instilled a core ideology that was fiercely protected, the creation of wholesome, high-quality American family entertainment that inspires imagination.
Notice what isn't in that core.
Right. The core wasn't, we make hand-drawn, two-dimensional animation.
That distinction is paramount. Because they possess such a clinical understanding of their core ideology, they were able to survive massive technological phase shifts that destroyed their competitors.
Like moving into live action.
Yes. In the 1950s, Disney created a famous internal document, a synergy map, that detailed how the core ideology would be distributed across different mediums. They realized that hand-drawn animation was just a practice.
It's just a tool.
Exactly. So they aggressively pivoted to feature-length Technicolor films, then to physical immersive theme parks, then to live-action television merchandising, and eventually, decades later, to modern digital streaming platforms.
The physical medium, the technology they used to deliver the product changed drastically and violently.
But the core ideology of immersive, wholesome family magic never wavered a millimeter.
I think the most accurate way for the listener to visualize this mechanism is not as a corporate strategy, but as the anatomy of a tree.
Let's unpack that.
The deep, expansive underground roots represent your core ideology. They anchor the entire organism to the earth. They are stubborn, they are rigid, they take decades to grow, and they do not move. If you rip up the roots, the organism dies.
Right.
But the leaves and the narrow branches, those are your day-to-day cultural practices, your current product lines, your marketing strategies, your tech stack. Those leaves have to change with the seasons.
They must adapt.
If a tree stubbornly refuses to drop its dead leaves in the winter, the snow accumulates, the branches snap, and the tree suffers.
The biological metaphor captures the exact operational challenge leaders face. The critical skill we are discussing today is the ability to ruthlessly separate your core values from your current cultural practices. And it is incredibly easy to confuse the two.
Give me an example of how people confuse them.
Sure. For instance, a modern tech company might genuinely believe that their core value is everyone working together in an open plan office from 9 to 5. They wrap their entire identity up in that physical space.
That's not a core value.
Exactly. That is merely a practice. The actual core value beneath it might be deep, unstructured, collaborative innovation.
Oh, I see the difference.
Once you possess the analytical clarity to separate the two, you realize you can entirely abandon the practice, say, by shifting to a globally distributed, asynchronous remote work model, while still fiercely preserving the core value of collaboration through new digital tools.
So your core values are sacred, but your business strategies are completely disposable.
Yes. You have to know who you are at an atomic level so that you have the psychological freedom to adapt everything else.
It's an incredible mental framework. Like, subscribe, and share for more update. Because once you have that anchor firmly set in the ground, you are faced with a massive contradiction in Chapter 6.
The necessary counterweight.
Right. If you are ruthlessly preserving your core, how do you avoid becoming stagnant?
This is what the source text calls stimulating progress. It is the deliberate engineering of a beautiful, highly stressful tension. You must constantly evolve, mutate, and grow without ever losing your foundational soul.
Okay, let me pause here, because if I am a listener applying this to my own career, I am experiencing severe cognitive whiplash right now.
It is a tricky balance.
You just spent 10 minutes explaining that I must never change my core. Now you are saying you must constantly and aggressively change. How do you physically reconcile those two mandates? Where is the line?
To reconcile them, we have to introduce a cognitive framework the authors call the genius of the A&D versus the tyranny of the OR.
The tyranny of the OR. That sounds ominous.
It is the trap of binary, zero-sum thinking. It is a hallmark of mediocre management. It forces you to choose. Either we stay true to our historic heritage, or we innovate for the future.
Either we maintain rigorous quality control, or we grow exponentially.
Exactly. Either we are conservative, or we take massive risks. Visionary companies completely reject that binary logic.
They embrace the genius of the A&D.
Yes. You must fiercely preserve the core A&D, relentlessly stimulate progress simultaneously. They're not mutually exclusive. They act like the two strands of a DNA double helix wrapping around each other to create the structure.
And a phenomenal, highly dramatic U.S. example of this double helix tension is Boeing's corporate history.
Yes. Boeing's legacy is defined by a terrifying willingness to bet the entire net worth of the company on the future of commercial aviation.
Like with the 747.
The most visceral example is the development of the 747 under CEO Bill Allen in the mid-1960s. The financial mechanics of this decision are staggering.
What were the numbers?
Boeing essentially wagered over $2 billion, which is substantially more than the total capitalization of the company at the time.
Wait, they bet more money than the company was worth?
Yes. To design and build an aircraft of unprecedented size, complexity, and aerodynamic risk. Furthermore, because the plane was so massive, they had to simultaneously build the largest building by volume in the world, the Everett factory, just to assemble it.
That is wild.
If the 747 failed, Boeing would have ceased to exist as a corporate entity.
Which raises the question, why take a risk that could literally erase your century-old company. It seems reckless.
It seems reckless until you view it through the lens of their core. Their core identity was not, we build safe, profitable, mid-sized jets. Their core was to be the ultimate pioneers in aeronautics.
To constantly push the bleeding edge of what humanity could achieve in the sky.
Precisely. If they had played it safe and only built iterative, minor updates to their older models, they would have preserved their cash flow, but they would have betrayed their core identity as pioneers.
So playing it safe was actually the most dangerous thing they could do.
Ironically, yes, it would have been soul-destroying. They preserved their core identity by taking a radical leap to stimulate progress.
It's like a shark. If it stops swimming forward, it drowns. The forward motion is required to keep the core alive.
That's a great analogy.
And if you want to keep pushing your own boundaries, like, subscribe, and share for more update. Because understanding that need for forward motion brings us to Chapter 7 and the specific tactical mechanisms visionary companies use to force themselves to take those massive leaps.
Which leads us to the concept of BHAG's Big Sherry Audacious Goals.
I love that acronym, BHAGs.
It's one of the most famous concepts to emerge from the source material. A BHAG is a goal so bold, so structurally intimidating, and so massive in scope that it acts as a unifying gravitational focal point for an entire organization or for an individual's life trajectory.
And the ultimate U.S. public sector BHAG, the one that perfectly defines the required mechanics, is President John F. Kennedy's 1961 Joint Session Address to Congress.
The Apollo mission.
Right, declaring that America would put a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth before the decade was out.
Let's analyze the exact physics of that declaration. When JFK made that speech, the audaciousness of it was almost absurd.
Because we didn't have the tech yet.
NASA did not possess the computing power necessary. The metallurgical alloys required to survive re-entry hadn't been invented. The orbital mechanics and rendezvous mathematics hadn't been fully calculated.
And the budget.
Microscopic compared to the task. It was a staggering goal.
Yeah.
But that is the mechanism of a BHAG. By setting an objective that is so massive it seems borderline impossible, you create an organizational forcing function.
It galvanizes an entire generation.
It forces hundreds of thousands of independent American scientists, engineers, manufacturers, and politicians to align their vectors.
I think of it like the physics of a laser beam. In a normal light bulb, the photons are scattered. They radiate in every direction, which provides a soft glow but no concentrated power.
Right.
A BHAG takes all those scattered human energies, aligns them into a single, coherent, focused wavelength, and suddenly you have a laser that can cut through steel.
That is a highly precise analogy.
But I want to ask a very pragmatic question for our listener. Let's say I am leading a startup or running a department. How do I physically distinguish a true BHAG from just a delusional, hubristic pipe dream that is going to bankrupt my company and burn out my staff?
It's a fine line.
Because I can walk into the office tomorrow and say, our goal is to hit $1 trillion valuation and mine asteroids by next Tuesday. That's big, it's hairy, it's audacious, but it's also stupid.
And that distinction is where most leaders fail.
Yeah.
A true BHAG is not an empty motivational poster.
Hmm.
It has rigorous structural criteria.
Okay, what are they?
First, it must have a clear, unambiguous, binary finish line. You have to know exactly when you've achieved it.
Yeah.
Being the best company in our industry is not a BHAG. It's a vague platitude.
Right.
Landing a man on the moon and returning him safely is a BHAG because there is zero ambiguity about whether it happened or not.
It either did or it didn't.
Second, while it must fall far outside your current comfort zone and require a massive leap of faith regarding the how, it must remain firmly anchored within your core ideology.
So Boeing building a massive passenger jet is a BHAG.
Yes. Boeing suddenly deciding to manufacture home washing machines would be a reckless delusion. A true BHAG stretches your operational capabilities to their absolute breaking point, but it perfectly aligns with who you fundamentally are at your core.
So it should make you deeply uncomfortable, but it shouldn't cause an identity crisis. It has to make sense for your specific organizational DNA.
Precisely.
Like, subscribe, and share for more update. Now, moving to Chapter 8, if you are going to attempt these massive, laser-focused leaps, you have to look at the human capital required. What kind of organizational psychology can survive that pressure?
This brings us to a highly controversial and fascinating dynamic, the psychology of belonging. The source text observes that visionary companies, the ones that achieve these BHGs, often cultivate internal environments that demand such tight ideological alignment that they are described as cult-like cultures.
I have to say, the terminology here is instantly jarring. The word cult carries an incredibly dark pathological connotation.
It absolutely does.
We immediately picture brainwashing, toxic leaders, and exploitation. How is a cult-like corporate culture structurally different from a toxic, abusive workplace that demands 80-hour weeks, gaslights its middle management, and demands blind, sycophantic loyalty?
That is a highly critical distinction to make.
Because in today's gig economy, where average tenure is dropping rapidly, demanding cult-like loyalty seems like a massive red flag.
When the authors use the term cult-like, they are not referring to coercion, isolation, or abuse. They are referring to extreme, uncompromising clarity of identity.
Clarity of identity.
Yes, a visionary company knows exactly what its core ideology is, it writes it down, and it makes zero apologies for it. This naturally creates an environment that is highly polarized.
Polarized how?
It functions almost exactly like a biological immune system. If you share those core values, you will be deeply energized, you will thrive, and you will feel a profound sense of purpose. You will love every second of it.
But if you don't,
If you do not share those exact values, the organizational immune system will recognize you as foreign tissue, and the culture itself will rapidly push you out.
it's not trying to be a comfortable place for everyone. It's trying to be an exceptional place for a very specific type of person.
Exactly. Let's examine the legendary corporate culture of Nordstrom in the United States.
The department store.
Yes, Nordstrom operates on a highly decentralized management structure, an inverted pyramid, where the frontline sales staff are given immense autonomy, but also intense pressure to perform.
I've heard some wild stories about Nordstrom customer service.
Oh, there are famous urban legends like the Nordy, who happily accepted the return of a set of tires, despite the fact that Nordstrom is a high-end department store that has never sold tires.
That's crazy. Did that actually happen?
Whether that specific event happened is irrelevant. The mechanism it represents is real. The culture is so deeply steeped in extreme, unyielding customer accommodation that employees are empowered to go to absurd, almost irrational lengths.
But the flip side of that autonomy is the pressure.
Right.
If you are an employee who fundamentally believes that work is just a transaction, you want to clock in, follow a rigid script, do the absolute bare minimum required by your job description, and clock out without expending any emotional energy, you are going to violently hate working at Nordstrom.
And that is exactly how the mechanism is supposed to work. A healthy cult-like culture doesn't rely on HR to fire misaligned people. The cultural friction makes misaligned people want to leave on their own.
They self-select out.
Exactly. The transience we see in the modern gig economy is often a symptom of time-telling, purely transactional leadership, where the company stands for nothing but profit. In contrast, a visionary environment provides profound meaning and alignment, creating a team of true, dedicated believers in a specific mission.
You are intentionally building a polarizing environment because neutrality is the enemy of excellence.
Well said.
Like, subscribe, and share for more update. But here's the paradox as we move into Chapter 9. If you have a team of deeply entrenched, highly aligned true believers, how do you prevent them from becoming dogmatic and stale?
How do you actually invent the future?
Right.
This requires a shift in how we view innovation. We must transition from rigid, top-down strategic planning to a mindset of experiment and evolve. It is a playful, decentralized, fearless approach to progress that mirrors the mechanisms of natural selection.
This is where the evolutionary biology analogy becomes incredibly precise. In nature, genetic mutation is not a planned strategic initiative. It is random and constant.
Completely random.
A mistake happens during DNA replication. Now, 99% of those mutations are either harmless or fatal. The organism fails.
Right.
But every once in a while, a random mutation provides a massive, unforeseen adaptation to a changing environment. That mutation survives, reproduces, and eventually becomes the new dominant trait of the entire species.
That is precisely the mechanism visionary companies use to circumvent dogmatic thinking. They do not rely on a genius CEO sitting in a boardroom predicting the future with a flawless 10-year master plan.
Because you can't predict the future.
Instead, they rely on a decentralized branching and pruning mechanism. They encourage thousands of small mutations. And the most iconic U.S. validation of this biological mechanism is the history of 3M, the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company.
This is the famous Post-it note story, but the actual internal politics of how it happened are what make it fascinating.
Yes, the creation of the Post-it note was not a top-down directive to invent a temporary bookmark. It was the result of systemic, protected mutation.
How is it protected?
3M had a structural policy known as the 15% rule. This was an internal bootlegging policy that allowed scientists to spend 15% of their paid hours tinkering with their own independent projects, completely decoupled from their official assignments or quarterly targets.
The company was intentionally funding random mutations.
During this 15% time, a scientist named Spencer Silver was trying to develop a super strong adhesive. Instead, he accidentally synthesized an acrylate copolymer microsphere, an adhesive that was incredibly weak and didn't stick permanently to anything.
In a rigid time-telling company focused only on immediate ROI, Silver would have been reprimanded for wasting resources, and that chemical formula would have been deleted.
Exactly. The mutation would have been killed. But because 3M's culture protected experimentation, Silver was allowed to give seminars about his failed adhesive for years.
He just kept talking about his weak glue.
Eventually, another 3M scientist, Art Fry, who sang in a church choir, grew frustrated because the paper bookmarks kept falling out of his hymnal.
Ah, serendipity.
He remembered Silver's weak adhesive, applied it to a piece of paper, and accidentally burst the Post-it note, one of the most ubiquitous consumer products in human history. It was a massive, unplanned, bottom-up innovation that only survived because the organization had built a mechanism to tolerate failure.
So the actionable takeaway for you, the listener, is this. You don't need a flawless roadmap to build a legacy. You just need to drastically increase the volume of your mutations.
That's the secret.
You apply this branching and pruning method to your department or your own life. Make small, asymmetrical, low-risk bets. Launch a weird pilot program. Test an unconventional marketing channel. Pitch an idea that seems totally orthogonal to your main product.
And accept that most will fail.
Right. Understand that most of these branches will die, and that is mathematically acceptable. You ruthlessly prune the dead branches and heavily fund the one random mutation that starts bearing fruit. You are literally engineering serendipity.
You build a clock that constantly invents its own future.
Like, subscribe, and share for more update. But as your organization scales through all this constant experimentation, the complexity multiplies, which brings us to Chapter 10. And that introduces the most critical vulnerability of any growing system: the succession of power.
Right. How do you find the leaders who can manage this complex evolutionary machine? This is where we look at the quiet, unglamorous power of building from within. The source material reveals a stark statistical reality. The absolute best leaders, the ones who successfully carry a visionary legacy across multiple decades, almost always emerge from deep inside the organization.
Because they've lived it.
They are thoroughly steeped in the core ideology because they grew up breathing it.
Let's examine the U.S. corporate archetype for this. General Electric during the 20th century, GE didn't just build jet engines and medical devices. Their actual primary product was leadership.
They really were a leadership factory.
They built an entire internal academy, the Crotonville Management Institute, founded in 1956. Their mechanism wasn't just sending managers to a weekend retreat. They systematically rotated their high-potential executives through radically different divisions.
From plastics to finance to aerospace.
Right. They were forcing their internal talent to become systemic thinkers, deeply ingraining the GE core ideology into their neural pathways so that when the time came for succession, the bench of qualified insiders was incredibly deep.
But I know you're going to challenge this reliance on internal promotion.
I have to, because look at modern corporate governance. When a legacy company stagnates, when the stock plummets and the market share erodes, the board of directors almost invariably panics and hires an external savior CEO.
Right, the white knight.
They bring in someone from a completely different industry with a flashy pedigree, specifically because they are an outsider. The logic is that the internal culture has gone toxic or stale, and you need a mercenary to come in, disrupt the old boys club, and shake things up. Doesn't an insular promotion system eventually lead to blindness?
That is the standard Wall Street argument.
Yeah.
But it conflates a short-term turnaround with a long-term legacy.
Okay, unpack that.
Can an external mercenary come in, ruthlessly slash the workforce, sell off underperforming assets, reorganize the balance sheet, and temporarily spike the stock price?
Absolutely, it happens every day.
But what the data reveals is that those external saviors rarely build or maintain visionary, long-lasting legacies. Why? Because while they may be competent administrators, they lack the deep emotional reverence for the company's core ideology.
They view the company as a spreadsheet, not an organism.
Precisely. In their zeal to fix the underperforming branches, they often unwittingly hack into the root system, destroying the very soul that made the company great in the first place.
So the external savior might buy you 3 years of profitable earnings, but they inflict terminal structural damage to the culture. The clock stops ticking when they leave.
Exactly. The master stroke of visionary leadership is not just promoting any insider. It is promoting a very specific type of insider.
What type?
You must identify and elevate leaders who possess a fanatical devotion to the core values, but who are simultaneously aggressively open to stimulating progress.
You want someone who loves the roots but isn't afraid to prune the branches.
You want an executive who bleeds the company colors, but possesses the ruthless courage to completely cannibalize the company's legacy products to build the future. That rare combination of deep roots and radical foresight is exponentially more powerful than renting a mercenary.
You have to grow your own leaders if you want to keep your soul intact. Like, subscribe, and share for more update. But let's assume you've done all of this. You have your core, your BHAGs, your evolutionary culture, and your homegrown leaders. You achieve massive market dominance.
Which brings us to Chapter 11.
Right, because success introduces the most insidious threat of all, the necessity of continuous improvement.
This is the principle of good enough never is. It is the institutionalization of a relentless, restless drive to keep great things great. Because the ultimate killer of a visionary company is not a competitor.
What is it?
It is the complacency born of their own success.
Yeah.
It is the arrogance of believing you have finally won the game.
I think the most terrifying modern U.S. example of this restless mechanism is the evolution of Amazon's logistics network. Let's look at the timeline. Amazon introduced Prime 2-day shipping in 2005.
That was a game changer.
At that moment in history, offering reliable, unlimited 2-day shipping across a continent-sized country was a logistical marvel. They completely dominated the e-commerce market. For any rational, time-telling management team, 2-day shipping was the pinnacle. It was the victory condition. It was vastly more than good enough.
But the internal mechanics of Amazon completely rejected that complacency. They didn't view 2-day shipping as a victory. They viewed it as a temporary baseline.
Which is wild.
So while they were dominating the market, they simultaneously invested billions of dollars to entirely reconstruct their supply chain topology. They moved from massive, centralized fulfillment centers to a highly complex, decentralized web of regional sortation centers, delivery stations, and a massive acquisition of Kiva Robotics.
They ruthlessly pushed the physical limits of logistics to achieve 1-day shipping, then same-day shipping, and now hyper-local sub-day delivery.
And the crucial point is this. They did not do this because a specific competitor was threatening them. They do it because their internal mechanism demanded it. They were competing against their own absolute limit of what was possible.
Okay, but let's map this back to the psychology of the listener, because hearing about Amazon's relentless drive is exhausting.
It sounds incredibly intense.
If good enough never is, how does a human being or a team of human beings maintain that level of hyper-optimization for decades without suffering massive psychological burnout? If you never celebrate a win and the goalpost is perpetually moving away from you, that sounds like a recipe for a toxic, high-turnover nightmare.
And it absolutely will be a nightmare if the motivation is extrinsic. If you connect this to the deeper psychological mechanisms of visionary cultures, the drive for continuous improvement cannot be fueled by panic.
External fear.
Right. If your drive comes from external fear, fear of missing quarterly targets, fear of a rival startup, fear of your boss firing you, you will burn out within 36 months. Fear is a highly corrosive, unsustainable fuel.
So what do visionary organizations do differently?
Visionary organizations build what the authors call mechanisms of discontent. And these mechanisms are entirely intrinsic.
What does an intrinsic mechanism of discontent look like?
It looks like a culture where the drive comes from a genuine intellectual joy for the process of optimization. It is the difference between sprinting because a predator is hunting you and sprinting because you are an elite athlete who genuinely loves the feeling of pushing your body's cardiovascular limits.
One is a state of perpetual terror. The other is a state of flow and mastery.
Exactly. You prevent burnout by embedding the pursuit of excellence into the daily routine through continuous peer review processes, blameless postmortems, and dedicated innovation labs. You make the constant search for the next step a stimulating intellectual puzzle rather than a frantic emergency.
You decouple improvement from anxiety. You improve because it is your nature to improve, not because you are terrified of losing. That is a profound distinction. Like, subscribe, and share for more updates.
Which brings us perfectly to Chapter 12, where we have to synthesize this entire massive framework.
Yes, we need to take these global corporate principles and distill them into a personal, actionable blueprint for your own life and legacy.
This is where the theory becomes deeply personal. Throughout this deep dive, we have analyzed macroeconomic giants, Boeing, Disney, J&J, Amazon. But the physics of legacy do not require billions of dollars.
The exact same structural mechanics apply at a microeconomic scale.
Yes. Let's picture a multi-generational, local U.S. family business. Imagine a 100-year-old family hardware store operating in a Midwestern town.
That is the perfect microcosm, because that hardware store doesn't have an Ivy League strategy department or access to venture capital.
Yeah.
Yet somehow this single storefront has survived the Great Depression, multiple periods of hyperinflation, the 2008 financial crisis, the invasion of massive big box retailers like Home Depot, and the total disruption of e-commerce. How did they survive?
They survived by intuitively architecting the exact blueprint we've discussed today. They survived because they implicitly understood the genius of the A&D.
They preserved their core.
They aggressively preserved their core, which in their case was likely a commitment to deep localized community trust and hyper-specialized high-touch expertise. That was their unchangeable anchor.
But simultaneously, they relentlessly stimulated progress. They mutated.
When the big box stores arrived, the local hardware store didn't stubbornly try to compete on price or massive inventory volume. They pruned those practices.
They digitized their supply chain, they shifted their inventory to highly specialized niche tools the big chains ignored, and they started offering complex repair services. They changed all their leaves and branches, but they never moved their roots.
And most importantly, the founder of that store acted as a clock builder. They didn't just stand behind the register and solve every customer's problem themselves.
They built inventory systems. They mentored the next generation of employees to understand the ethos of the town. They built a structure that could open the doors and serve the community, even if the founder was in the hospital.
Which proves that the scale of the organization does not change the fundamental physics of endurance. Whether you are leading a multinational conglomerate, managing a regional sales team, or simply trying to establish a set of values for your family to carry forward, the cohesive thesis remains identical.
True legacy has absolutely nothing to do with being remembered as a brilliant, indispensable individual. It is the exact opposite.
It is about building resilient structures, cultivating aligned cultures, and instilling non-negotiable values that will continue to generate utility and good in the world, regardless of who is currently occupying the chair.
So as you look at your own professional and personal life right now, you have to run a brutal diagnostic. Are you operating as a time teller? Are you trying to be the indispensable hero of every single crisis at your job? Are you hoarding information to make yourself valuable? If so, you are actively destroying your own legacy.
It is time to start building your clock. Focus your energy on designing resilient systems, documenting your processes, mentoring the people around you, and clearly defining the core values you will never compromise.
You must architect an ecosystem that doesn't need you. Like, subscribe, and share for more update.
And as we step back and synthesize the immense terrain we've navigated today, every single mechanism, every anecdote, and every principle loops back to a central unifying duality.
The genius of the A&D. You must deeply identify and relentlessly preserve the core, your unchangeable roots, your profound purpose, your non-negotiable values, and you must fearlessly stimulate progress, encouraging mutations, setting terrifying BHAs, and refusing to settle for the complacency of good enough. Managing that tension is the heartbeat of a visionary legacy.
And as we close this deep dive into the source material, we want to leave you with a deeply resonant question. We want you to carry this with you into your next meeting, your next strategic planning session, or your next conversation with your family.
What's the question?
If you were to inexplicably disappear tomorrow, what is the exact operational and cultural clock you leave behind? Are the systems, the people, and the culture you've so carefully influenced capable of ticking on seamlessly without you? Or does your entire world instantly stop the moment you step out of the room?
Wow, that's something to think about. We wish you the absolute best of luck on architecting your own eternal blueprint. Take care, everyone.